If not, it is my elated privilege. Thank you, all the speakers, the panelists, and audience, and last but not the least, the organizers of the 8th Annual Conference of the Asian Council of Science Editors in 2022. Thank you very much indeed, and God bless you all. So back to the organizer, Mariam Saab, please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Aslam and
You're
Charlie
welcome.
Meow for conducting the session and completing all of the presentation, even the panel discussion on time. So we have been reached for the last session of our today's meeting, that is panel discussion on an very interesting topic, GPP4. And I would like to invite Dikran Toroser, Dan Bridges, and Lisa to join us as panel experts for discussion on insights into good publishing practices, guidelines, and how they may impact publication development in Asia.
Yes, sorry, we were a few minutes early. So should we introduce ourselves, or is that what we're doing?
A brief introduction will be good, Lisa.
Okay, great. So hi, I'm Lisa Tora, and I am an associate professor and the director of STEM writing. So it's science, technology, engineering, and math writing at Hofstra University in New York in the United States. And I'm also the lead author for the new Good Publication Practice Guideline, which is hopefully appearing shortly. I'm joined today by Dikran, who I think we all know extremely well from this meeting, who's just presented an excellent presentation on preprints and also some other work. Dikran, do you want to say a few words about yourself?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm Dikran Toroser. I work for a major pharmaceutical company where I lead a group of publication professionals, and I'm delighted to be part of this panel and working with Lisa and Dan, which we've worked on this with a bigger committee since 2019. So I'm very excited about this presentation. Thanks, Lisa.
Yes, great. Thank you, Dikran. And we're also joined by Dan Bridges, who was one of the original chairs of the GPP4 panel. He's the head of the Board of Trustees of ISMAP, the International Society for Medical Publication Professionals, and also another co-author of this work. Dan, do you have any more words to say about yourself?
Sure. So I've been involved in this for 3 iterations now of GPP, from GPP 2.3 and this latest update. And on top of that, have quite a predominant role in this particular region in my other role as the global CEO of Inizio Medical, which is a large medical affairs supporting company that has offices all around the world.
Excellent. Thank you very much for those lovely introductions. So this is our, So this is our disclosures. So these are our opinions, and we're representing our own opinions and not even necessarily those of our co-authors. And we did not get any financial support for this presentation or for the development of the new guidelines. Okay, this is just an overview of our authoring group. We do have fairly broad representation from different regions and different kinds of job roles within this group. I will just say, though, that Africa and Latin America are not strongly represented, but we do have people among the team who've worked in those areas. All right. So we decided to start with a slide on what is good publication practice. I've shown an image here of the current guidelines since the new one is not out yet. We will see that Dan's name is right here. So just supporting the statement that he just made. So good publication practice was intended to follow on the model of ICH E6, good clinical practice in order to lay down the appropriate ways to maintain ethics and integrity in publishing the results, particularly of clinical trials that were sponsored by companies, in order to kind of hold people more accountable for engaging in proper practices. So it's for industry context. It's been updated regularly. The first GPP came out in 2003. GPP3 is 2015. So now we're having a new one. And what's been important about GPP is that as publishing expands in various regions and into various subject matters, the guidance itself has had to expand in order to address those new concerns. So Dan and Dikran, do you have anything to add?
And
Okay, we're good. All right.
Oh,
So,
sorry, Lisa, I was just going to say, I mean, I think this is really important for this region right now because of the sheer volume of data that we're generating in this region, and the increased data will continue to do so. I'm really excited to see how we can all work together to embed the themes of GPP in all of our work.
right. Yeah, that's a great point. And maybe what we can learn about GPP from people in this region, I think, is also very important. So when we started out our work on GPP4 versus GPP3, we had a few goals in mind. So one of the major goals is to make sure that we remain aligned with the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors updates to their recommendations. And then some other things have kind of become increasingly important over the years since GPP3. So how are patients involved in publications? What are the different roles that they... Oh, sorry about that. How do we foster people providing policies or standard operating procedures or educating their teams about good publication practice or even publishing in general? The role of preprints, which we just heard this excellent panel on, enhanced content and social media, and things like plain language summaries that also should accompany some articles. And then inclusivity. How do we make sure that we're including different people, different job roles, different functions in the publication endeavor? So if we're thinking about how the field is expanding from GPP3 perhaps to GPP4, the publication groups in company-sponsored settings are more and more commonly managing many different kinds of research. So health economics and outcomes research has been a theme for quite a while. Patient-reported outcomes, real-world evidence is also increasingly managed by these groups, as well as non-clinical, preclinical, and biomarker work, which was unusual, say 10 years ago, but it's much more usual now. We have a greater awareness of global publication trends. There's more people who have experience working outside of their immediate country context, a greater awareness of the role of patients, and also a greater awareness of the global South and East, not just that these places exist, but that there's important expertise here that has not necessarily been included in the past. So Dan or Dikran, do you have anything to add?
I agree. I think the field is, moving so fast that some of the items you mentioned in especially real world evidence and HEO are so pivotal. Thank you for mentioning them.
Oh, you're welcome, Dikran.
Yeah, and I think the volume of data. So one of the challenges we often see is that as you move into real world evidence, there's an increased ability to generate research and data. So how do we help people make sure they publish that in all of your journals so that we can really get a true set of data for decision making in medical surgeries around the world?
Right, that's great. So kind of increasing the rigor of the work that we have available to use. Okay, great. So one of the things that we had a huge advantage in our update was the working environment. So as GPP3 was being developed, there was a lot of political pressure. There was a lot of negative coverage in the news media of the publications profession in general. And there's actually a group called GAP that was formed in order to counter some of the negative press. So we included a link here in case you're curious. GAP disbanded before we started our work, which was a very healthy sign. GPP3, there was also adapted for the Asia Pacific context. So that's the Hesp et al. Paper, and I put a link into the paper below. It's a really wonderful paper that was developed to translate the existing principles for different cultural contexts. So in terms of thinking about this particular group and our particular presentation, and of course, moving to recognize more people outside of, say, the US or the EU context, is thinking about how people in Asia and people of different kinds of Asian ethnicities are underrepresented in medical research and the medical literature. And I use the quotations here because there's a tendency to say that like Asian identity is one thing, but it's not. There's equal amount of diversity in Asia compared to the entire world. And we need to, I think, honor the expertise and also the presence of that kind of diversity in that setting. So one of the things that we believe, and I'm just going to speak here for Dan and Dikran, is that the members of this group have a very important role to play in translating these GPP principles for individual journals and individual contexts, because we can't dictate to other people. It's open to interpretation because this is a guideline. Is there anything further to add?
I would say that, in view of the information we heard at this meeting, I think getting items to the literature in a compliant manner, following some of the GPP guidance, so that the information is available to the regions, especially working from in a global company. I know that's so important. Is going to be it's going to be very important.
Yeah, I think this is a really important slide, Lisa, because we've done the easy part, right? Which is we've put a guideline, but the actual implementation, the actual how do you make it be utilized comes down to the journals and how they embed it within their processes and requirements. We can't force a change if the journals aren't with us to improve the compliance approach. So that's why it's so exciting to be invited to speak here, because I think this really helps us make something real out of what currently is more theoretical.
Right. Yeah. And I think we also were very eager to honor the fact that journal editors are the decision makers about a lot of these policies ultimately, and that we can provide guidance, but it's up to the journal editors to provide us with guidance as well. All right. So we're moving in now to what exactly we did with GPP4 that was a little bit different than GPP3. So for this new iteration that will be coming out, we had a single author who generated the full drafts and edited the document for consistency and to remove redundancies in order to create some standalone sections that describe different practices. So we have a small section on how to put together a steering committee for publications. We have a section on how do you determine authorship for a paper. We have a section on how do you develop an individual paper. And we wanted to have these appendices that could make these different practices more understandable to outsiders, by which we would mean groups like students, maybe academic authors who haven't published in the past, perhaps people who are new to this practice, perhaps patients. And we wanted a platform for training new publications professionals. In the past, the publication profession drew very heavily from people who were already in roles in clinical development, in regulatory documentation, perhaps in a different kind of medical affairs role. And now you're seeing an increasing trend for bringing people in shortly out of their education. So there's an enhanced need for training for those professionals. So a benefit for the membership of an editorial group like ACSE is that we're being more transparent with these individual practices, which will greater empower editors to ask questions about what's been done within individual papers. So is there any further? That we're good?
Yeah.
Okay. Alrighty. Yeah, so sorry for the more casual approach to this. I teach in a writing studies and rhetoric department, so we tend to be a little bit looser about how we do our presentations. One of the other things that was interesting about this particular iteration of GPP was that we really sought to include the membership of the publications profession. And we wanted to make sure that we had a lot of different kinds of comments from people in different sorts of job roles. So we solicited a volunteer review. So 122 sets of comments were sent to us from different ISMAP volunteers. However, these volunteers all worked within their company or their local context in order to get comments from their colleagues. So it actually represents many more than 122 different voices. And we had also invited comments from 38 expert reviewers. And some of those reviewers also had worked within their group. So if we had an expert reviewer, for instance, who supervised a large group of people, they may have sent the document for comment among all of their employees. So we were really fortunate in receiving comments, again, kind of broadly from different areas of the world. We didn't formally track the location. I think we could probably dig through some data in a spreadsheet and put that together, which might be interesting for people. But we did, I think, take care to make sure that people in different locations in Asia were represented. And we wanted to provide insights for editors and for other users on what these practitioners found to be important. So we did change the document pretty heavily in response to these comments. But again, we still need leadership from different journals and journal editors and experts outside of our immediate context to help authoring groups understand the needs in those areas. Is there any other?
Yeah, I agree with you, Lisa. I think ACSE is being a portal to communicate this information and to really communicate what the GPP message is. Transparency written in a beautiful manner. I think the single voice that has come out of the process you described is going to really help the membership. So full agreement. Thank you.
Oh,
Yeah, and it's what you mentioned earlier, Lisa. It's a two-way dialogue. This shouldn't be seen as a static guideline. It should be seen as something where, as we get feedback, the practical implementation can be updated.
Right, it's a great point. Okay, sorry. So we also thought about what we were calling a living document model. So whenever we've done a run through, this is what's happened when Dan has commented. He's kind of gone right into that, which is great. So we don't want this to be considered to be static. We want to encourage people to think of this as something that's subject to revision and adaptation. So this actually reflects the past practice. Since this is the 4th iteration, we're just making that a little bit more explicit this time. And we wanted, again, to reflect the input from practitioners. However, one of the things that we have been speaking about among the team is paying more attention in future endeavors to cultural sensitivity with working in different regions and cultural contexts, and also increased attention to the voices of patients. So among the review teams, we didn't actually solicit particular review from patients, partly because we felt it might be burdensome. However, that is a voice that would be needed in the future. Any other comments? No, because we covered it on the last slide. Okay, great. Okay, so we're just going to go over quickly a few trends of importance potentially for editors that we felt were important within the update. So we've got enhanced content, social media, and then kind of thinking a little bit about cultural sensitivity. Okay, so for enhanced content, we are encouraging that. And we are especially encouraging plain language summaries. There's a recent publication that came out from an ISMAP sub-team on plain language summaries that sort of walk through what the features of those should be, and the fact that at least a text-based plain language summary should appear with every paper that's published. However, you could include video or audio to increase access, and then thinking about regions where people might have there might be limited access to sort of text-based sources. Video or audio could in fact be very helpful for reaching people in different regions or different areas. All of the enhanced content should really still adhere to the same principles for quality and integrity. And the authors of the main article should also be fully aware of what's in the enhanced content. So any other things to add?
Yeah, I would add here, this particular item, enhanced content, over the last couple of years has skyrocketed. So people are almost demanding, many congresses actually are demanding audio together with the submissions. So the GPP guidance around that is very, very important.
So Dikran, what does that look like if they're demanding audio at a conference?
It's the people in my team are having to reach out to find out whether it's mandatory or not, what the preference is if it's not mandatory. Other considerations come into play. As presentations are being made, then the company has the choice or whether or not to review for accuracy the text that could be spoken to. Most companies have chosen not to do that. Authors have full control on what they're presenting, but it's very interesting to see this extra way of communicating the data and making it available so it's more useful.
Yeah, I would just add in, I think this is a really important thing to consider as to how we maintain the GPP approach within the enhanced content. It's something, at least from the journal perspective and the editor perspective, to think about how early you start this so that it can go through the same rigorous peer review process, or at least some level of review process to show that it's equivalent to the full manuscript, in order to protect the companies. If they don't feel that it's getting that rigor, they'll feel uncomfortable putting it out there, particularly if it's a pre-launch product, because then it may look like off-label promotion. So I think this is a really good one to think about. How do you build this into the journal processes in order to allow this to happen? And it has massive impact in terms of readership and all those other metrics that would be very positive for the journals.
Right. And if we're thinking about the accuracy, it could also affect patients or practitioners who maybe want to rely on that information. The one, and we hadn't really talked about this, but as you mentioned it, I do some work in what's called technical communication. And I've been asked to produce like video, audio, and transcripts in order to speak at meetings. And it's very interesting because they want things to be kind of exactly the same. So you have a video, you have an audio, you have it embedded in your slides, and then you're also producing a separate transcript in order to make sure that different people can use that. And it's more of a US based thing, but they're concerned about people who have, maybe some sort of visual impairment or some sort of auditory impairment will still have access to that content. So it's really something exciting to think about for the future. Okay, so let's see, can we go next? Okay, our next slide is about social media posting. So that we had some lively discussions about this during the development of GPP, of this new GPP guidance. And it was a really interesting field. So one of the things that we realized as we were trying to work on this is that logically, you would think it could be like enhanced content, as Dan said, and just kind of subjected to a rigorous process, but regulatory requirements are very different for social media posting versus scientific communication. So what we decided ultimately was that people who are at companies or agencies should really only work through their appropriate channels within the company. So if they have a public relations or external communication group, that those are the places that should be posting social media, not necessarily company employees directly, so that this leaves the burden of social media posting on the academic authors and then also on the journals. So that's kind of something to be aware of. So that journals will probably have to show a lot more leadership and provide a lot more guidance on this in order for people to be able to support their goals. So are there any other thoughts on this?
I had a couple of thoughts around this, and because it's new in this iteration of GPP, I think it's got to be said that the medium itself, social media, whether it's Twitter or not, is risky. It's rife for misunderstanding, and depending on how a message goes out, or if it's from a single employee, misunderstanding in terms of promotional flavor becoming apparent. So I know there is differences from a pharmaceutical company point of view, what companies are doing, but I think following GPP guidance around this at this moment in time is going to be very important.
Yeah, no, I would completely agree. I mean, as an academic author, I'm very strongly encouraged to be on social media a lot, but I think that also can come with its own problems. So just kind of figuring out a balance, I think that journal editors can provide a lot of guidance because this is still a very new and emerging field. Any other thoughts before I move on? We're good? Okay. So I think that this is our last slide. So this is our slide on cultural sensitivity. So kind of thinking about ways to respect other cultures and not to just kind of impose one's own will or idea of what's good practice on others, but to lay out some principles and allow people to actually interpret them for a local context. So we do have some information about inclusivity, which is stated explicitly, so that's actually rather new. There's a lot of work needed at the regional and journal level to guide authors. So we wanted to really acknowledge that GPP has been developed primarily by colleagues located in the EU and US. And although we have experience working in different contexts, particularly the Asia context, or kind of actually going to these places and working there on location. Dan, I believe that you're not in Europe or the United States right now. No. So that's maybe not enough. Maybe we need better guidance that's more authentic from people who are actually living and working in that area more primarily. So issues of sensitivity could include working with authors. So like kind of understanding the cultural context or understanding how, you know, politeness works in various cultures, and that perhaps someone who's holding back their opinion doesn't lack an opinion. They just have not been adequately invited to share that opinion. We need to think about regulatory requirements. I cited here ICH E5, which is a guideline on ethnic factors in clinical trials. This is a very complex area that affects clinical research across many different countries, but it seems to strongly affect countries in Asia, where the regulators need to kind of really sit down and think about which clinical data apply to people in their local context. Obviously, Japan has been a huge leader in this particular area, but there's some very exciting work also going on in China and Korea, Vietnam, kind of thinking about, well, who are our local populations? Are we making sure that we have adequate representation of people in clinical trials? And, you know, are these trials adequate, or do we need to do further study within our own country to make decisions about what to market and how to treat patients? And then also thinking about audience needs. In different cultures where we have different ideas of what counts as polite, even the way that one presents data you could inadvertently offend people, or it could become non-convincing because the way that you've put the argument together is not quite right. You're not leading in the correct direction. So I think that these are other areas, again, where editors can really provide strong guidance for the readership that they represent in their journals. So I think this is our last slide. So do we have any closing remarks?
I wanted to say the cultural sensitivity is a huge item. I'm so glad that's in GPP, and it's going to be something in the future as well. You know, in my group, the most senior person is an expert on how to do things right. So working with the regions, with the Asian regions, and just looking, I know a lot of companies are embedding their senior people in regions that are very important, so we communicate properly and do not step on banana skins.
Yeah, I think as we try and work out how to embed this, it's you know, there's very few guidelines that are truly global in the world in any remit, right? So it's about understanding that things like GPP are an ethos and an ethical guide, but actually it doesn't have to be embedded exactly the same in every single culture and every single region. You know, I've spent the last week, I'm actually, as Lisa said, I'm in Singapore at the moment discussing some of these issues, and yeah, it's definitely something where, as long as people are trying to move towards the ethos and the ethics that we're talking about, how they achieve that, they're far better experts to work out than any of us are. So yeah, that's the way I would look at it. If hopefully you read the article when it comes in the not too distant future and think about it from an ethos and a ethics standpoint, it will really help you to embed it within your own practices.
Right. Yeah. So I think one of the things we can do is when the article comes out, we can send the link to Mariam so that it could be distributed to the attendees. So it should be, it'll be a free to access or open access article. I don't remember how our journal is going to classify that, but just to make sure that people have the benefit or not, they can make their own judgment about what they would like to do. So, oh no, we have one more slide. So we've said this several times that, yeah, sorry, it's extremely early for me here in New York. Right, so ACSE can provide important insights into publication practices worldwide. I think that this is an embedded, we haven't said this in our GPP document, but I'm saying it now. We don't necessarily learn enough from people outside of our immediate context. And we maybe feel like, oh, the New England Journal of Medicine is who we should be listening to, but we should really be listening to everyone. And you can see this even in the membership of the ICMJE. It's increasingly global and it's less focused on United States and European journals. So our new format should give editors an enhanced ability to ask questions and gain needed information from authors, but there's still a need for among authoring groups, especially academic authors, for guidance regarding individual journal policies. As I've mentioned slightly, I work in many different fields, and it's interesting kind of working with junior researchers or graduate students. Different journals, like it's very difficult for some of the journals to figure out what they actually would like. So that's something that's potentially interesting. And then kind of editorial societies. So as different editors come together and come up with society policies and statements, that's a huge need for people who put together scientific papers. Okay, so yeah, so sorry about that. Are there any further last words, or am I just gonna feel foolish? I'll just feel foolish, it's fine. So we'll just do the last slide. So thank you everyone for your kind attention, particularly to this last presentation at the very end of what looked like a very exciting conference. All right.
Thank you, Liza. Here are some questions that we received regarding GPP4, and what I received from the questions from our members and the attendees. GPP4 still needs some more clarification for the medical editors and to know what the guidelines are and how they can be reproducible and usable for editors and authors. So I am sharing the questions with you. There are like 5 to 6 questions, so you can just go ahead with quickly with the answers, and accordingly we will wrap up this panel discussion.
Okay. Do we have the questions? Are they just here in the chat?
I'm going to share a document having the question, a Word document, just a minute.
Okay. Okay. Are these guidelines? Oh. Okay.
Now you can see that there are some misconceptions for the members and the audience regarding GPP4 and how they perceive these guidelines.
That's a great, so these are excellent questions. Thank you for these excellent questions. So the guidelines are for authors and for companies specifically. So people working in the company context in order to follow more carefully the rules of the journal editors. Dikran or Dan, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, the predominance of the publications that will be covered will probably be in medical journals if we take medical science as medical rather than sort of pure medical journals. But it doesn't have to be. It could be in payer journals, could be in all sorts of other places. So it's for company-sponsored research is probably the biggest and easiest way of clarifying what it is. However, we'd love everyone doing research in medical field and beyond to pick them up, but our focus primarily was on company-sponsored research.
Right. Yeah, I mean, but you could use these same guidelines if you're working in technical communication. I think it would be hard in literature, but in anything where it's a study, you could use these. Okay.
And the effort that's going into producing the medical data, I think you know, most of the trials are company sponsored, so I guess it's hitting the right audience here.
Yeah, that's a great point. So what's the expected reaction from within Asia about GPP4? I don't know. I mean, I'm hoping that this is viewed to be a helpful guidance. So it's just intended to be something that people can interpret to the local context. Dan or Dikran?
Yeah, certainly GPP3 was very well received in the region. There was a real vacuum of support for how to do these things, and a poor communication from certain regions out. So this is about providing information and insight for people to make their own decisions, and I think generally that's very well received.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Dikran, do you have anything, or should I move on to the next question?
I think the cultural component to the Asia component. I do think there is. I think the manuscript says day-to-day thinking and injecting what works in the regions. That's still going to be required, but I expect GPP4 to be very well received. I think there's a sensitivity there that's new, very well written in my view.
Oh, thanks. Well, and thank yourself because you also wrote a lot of stuff. Okay, so what could be the role of ACSE in implementing and introducing these guidelines in Asia? Well, I would think so. My understanding of the membership of ACSE is that it's mixed between people who are editors and people who are practitioners and scientists. Is that correct?
Yes, Liza.
So, I mean, editors should look at these guidelines and see how well it conforms with their journal practices and policies, because we can't set the policy for the journal, and then can provide a little bit of guidance to their authors about whether or not there's some difference between this guideline and their own personal policies. And they can always also provide feedback to us, because there will be the corresponding editor, who will be me, will be delighted to hear from anyone, any feedback about the article. Any other thoughts?
I think that ACSE and other major organizations are going to play a pivotal role. I think the field is moving so fast and there's so many changes coming our way. Last couple of years have been especially fast, that educating the attendees at ACSE and at ISMAP and AMWA is just going to be irreplaceable, I think, that in my view.
Right. So we had a comment come up in the chat that many medical editors are from academic backgrounds. And is it ethical to allow academic editors with little clinical experience to be involved in policymaking on clinical practice? Yeah, I think that that's a really great question. And I think it depends on the scope of the journal. So if you're editing a journal, obviously the editor of the journal should be responsible for that scope. However, for broader guidelines, it's certainly a voice that should be heard, but maybe it's not the voice that determines the ultimate outcome, so that you need to have a balance between people with more and less experience in that field. Dan or Dikran, do you have anything to add? Okay. All right, so there's some questions here about the relationship from the Committee on Publication Ethics, or COPE, and GPP. We very strongly recommend within GPP that the COPE guidelines be followed. So COPE does not develop a guideline to this level of granularity. So this is much more specific. So it's kind of a how-to guide to put your publication together in the hopes that it will be meeting the criteria that COPE has put out. So we definitely view our work as work that hopefully complies with COPE, rather than telling COPE what to do. Is that okay? Alrighty, so let's see. Hard work and teamwork are required to develop these kinds of guidelines, but the practical implications, isn't that more difficult? How do we achieve practical implementation? Wow, what an excellent question. So I guess step one would be to read the guideline and then kind of think about which parts of the guideline apply to what you're doing. So not every single section of the guideline will apply to every single study. And then think about how to do your best in order to follow those guidelines. That seems like not the best answer, but I don't know that there's much else we can do.
Well, from a pharmaceutical company point of view, I think what tends to happen when these iterations appear, to a large extent, they do become the cornerstone of process. So pretty much the guidance tends to be written into the SOPs, operating protocols. So thankfully, people don't have to think too much to go back to the paper because it's there in their SOP, and they follow up, checklisted the items. A little bit more difficult in an academic environment, but I hope they also start writing SOPs, in my view.
Well, you could. Dan, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think any guideline lives or dies by its consistency of application. And obviously we've said about not being fully consistent in that with the cultural side, but in terms of the level of pickup from journals, the level of reference from journals to this guideline, and referring back to it when assessing studies will be a key part of embedding it. If that pickup is good and it becomes standard, just like the way that ICMJE do things, then I think we can really make very fast progress.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. One of the things, I also do some work in regulatory writing, and one of the things that we advise there is consult with your collaborators. So, don't just proceed, but also consult with people and allow time for people to think through what they'd like to do and to have other consultation time with their colleagues. So often when something's new, you need to kind of gather people's thoughts and really allow yourself a little bit of time to think over the best way to implement something rather than feeling a pressure to be implementing immediately. So I realize that that's a very I of course live in New York, so it's a very New York thing that we instantly do everything. However, that's not always the best way. And in a situation like this, it's usually not the best way. So that like careful thinking and careful implementation is really, I would say, the way to go. It's sincerely, I'll be the corresponding author on this paper. I would love to hear any comments that people have. It would be really a huge favor to us to receive the feedback.
Thank you, Liza. We will be adding the questions if we receive after the session 2 on our YouTube channel, where we will be putting this panel discussion session on air. So that will be very much interactive for the GPP4